Get down to our lesson here, and we're kind of going over a few things again, as it so happens, but it doesn't do any harm to really allow our minds to be able to grasp some of these principles here on which Daniel and Revelation make sense. We're looking, when I say that, speaking in reference of a time principle, the year-day prophecy, or should I say, a prophetic day equals one literal year when we're looking at prophetic time here. So that's our theme again this morning. And we made the point when we started that when we have these grand themes in the books of Daniel and Revelation, is it not reasonable to expect that any time prophecies will match them and will be in proportion to them? We looked at that, right? Second thing we looked at was also the fact that in apocalyptic prophecy we have symbolism, and we just looked at some of the examples there in Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Revelation 13. So it's heavy into symbolism. So the question I have here, now specifically getting down to the time issue, if the events and the nations and the powers are depicted through symbolism, should we not expect, therefore, is it not reasonable to expect that the time periods in these prophecies should also be looked at and interpreted in a symbolic sense? Now, of course, there's only one way we can really do that, of course, then is to have a look and see what actually fits and see which actually works. Now, we have two major verses that we use to show that, prophetically speaking, a day equals a literal year. What two verses are they, by the way? We've got one in Numbers and one in Ezekiel. Numbers 14:34 and Ezekiel 4:6. Numbers 14:34 and Ezekiel 4:6. You see there, God himself equates one day with a literal year when we're dealing with prophetic time. Now, when we look at these time periods that I mentioned this morning, the 1,260 days, 2,300 days, and the 70 weeks, or 490 days, doesn't actually say in those passages in Daniel 7 and 8 that, okay, in this instance, a day equals a year. We're drawing an assumption based upon the fact that God has used prophetic time elsewhere, like in Numbers and Ezekiel, so we're taking that principle and applying it here to see if it works. Well, the only real way to prove it is to actually look, right? So what we need to do is take the two approaches, the literal time of just days, or the prophetic principle of a day meaning a literal year. All right, and let's see which makes the most sense. Looking at Daniel 7:25, let's turn there, please. Daniel 7:25, actually Daniel 7:24 and 25. Here we're looking at the little horn power doing various things, speaking words against the Most High, changing times and laws. We understand what that's all about. We don't have time to look into that anyway. We're looking at the fact that here he's got this authority, or he does this for times and the dividing of time. That is 3.5 years, which is 1,260 prophetic days, which we're saying is 1,260 literal years. But if we take the day approach, we really have some problems here, because we're looking at 1,260 days, and so literally 3.5 years. What we're saying here, the little horn power, if we go from 538, when the Bishop of Rome was really able to exercise power, 538, that's the date that history testifies. He was free to actually exercise the power being given a little earlier by Justinian. Then we're saying that the papacy only lasted for 3.5 years. Doesn't really fit with the historical record, does it? Not very well. We know that the papacy lasted for much longer than that, and actually still does exist, of course. And so if we take the year 538, it takes us up to about 542 AD. So about 542 AD, the papacy was gone. It's all done with. It doesn't fit, does it? History doesn't look at things that way. If we go in verse 25, it speaks of the little horn being able to persecute the saints for these 3.5 years. If you take that literally, then again, persecution against the faithful, 542 AD, it was not over by any means. In fact, it was just getting started. You follow what I'm saying here? It was just getting started. Another point, too, that we look at, it says in verse 25, shall be given into his hand until a time and times and dividing of time. In other words, he would have power to persecute only until this time period was expired. All right? That doesn't really fit until. It just doesn't work. Because if we use that, and we're going to be consistent with that, in verse 26 it says, but the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion and consume and destroy it unto the end. Sometime soon after 542 AD, according to this, the investigative judgment would begin. Well, that doesn't fit either, does it? So I hope we can see how applying literal days here just doesn't work. And then this causes another problem when we get to Daniel chapter 8 and verse 14. When was the starting time of Daniel chapter 8 verse 14? We go 457 BC, right? Yeah, 457 BC. That was the starting point of not only the 2300 days, but also the 70 weeks. When I was here last time, I had a book called The Chronology of Ezra 7 by two doctors, Wood and Horn, and they showed with the astronomical data, archaeological data, and so on, that 457 BC, the fall of 457 BC, was when King Artaxerxes of Persia issued his decree, which was in conjunction with two previous decrees, and yet it superseded those decrees in as much as Artaxerxes' decree gave. If it wasn't for him, the building would not have been completed, and it was his decree that gave the Jews autonomy, still under their Persian power, to be very self-ruling, very autonomous in many ways. So if we go now to the 2300 days, and we go from 457 BC, and we go 2300 days into the future, how many years is that in literal time? So we're looking at something like 457. We're looking at something still in the year 456 BC, when the temple, supposedly the city, was built. So you see, it just doesn't work.